Welcome to our RaboResearch Food and Ag Reports on Brownfield. I'm anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us today is Sterling Liddell, Senior Global Data Analyst for RaboResearch Food and Agribusiness. Good morning.
Good morning, Megan.
Talk about the future growth and how it relates to the U.S. pork industry. In your recent report, really it looks like the pork industry is positioned to grow, or at least it's positioned to be in expansion mode for another few years. Let's start first and talk a little bit to summarize what you're expecting for the U.S. pork industry.
Well, Megan, there are several things that are currently in position to push or drive the U.S. pork industry to growth into the future. Those keys are the expansion of production, some expansion in consumption in the United States, and also expansion of exports globally to some of our key players. Those are really all the dynamics that are allowing this industry to grow. There's several dynamics on the supply side that are starting to show that growth, but over time that will play along with the normal growth in carcass weights and also efficiency, producing pigs per female or even weight per female, to have some challenges in the future with supply. But in general, those are the drivers, along with, of course, we have to mention less expensive feed.
As we take a look at the pork industry and what's been going on market-wise, it's been really interesting to watch it for the last year. As we've seen production increase, prices have held on fairly well. As we look ahead, let's talk maybe a little and start first with a little short-term outlook about where you see up the fourth quarter of this year and as we head into 2018.
As we look at the rest of this year, there is the potential for some additional expansion, and we expect next year to show a little bit as well. Exports are off to a decent start, or at least finishing up this year in a very strong way, a little bit stronger than we'd actually projected. We thought it would be about 8.4% increase year over year, and it's actually going to be about 8.9%, with no sign of really letting up, at least with our major trading partner, which is Mexico now. We did see a little decline in Japan, which was offset by a little increase in South Korea, and we've seen a little bit of drop, which we expect to continue in China and Hong Kong. But for the most part, it looks reasonably strong. There is going to probably be a decrease in carcass cutout values over the next few months and quarters that we expect not to be in the necessarily where they are now, in the mid to high $80 range. We expect that to probably drop off and be somewhere in the mid 70 range over the next coming months and quarters. So a little bit of a drop off based on a number of animals coming to market, but still holding relatively strong compared to history.
As we talk about the pork industry in expansion mode, we kind of need to look at it from different angles. As we look at it from the pork producer side of things, what are some things that they need to think about as it relates to preparing for more hogs entering the market and how it relates to their profitability?
Well, there's a number of things that are changing in the dynamics, and most producers are aware of these, but the question is, how long will it last? Looking at the animal itself and the taste profiles, we have seen in the primals a mixed response where bellies have been much more demanded and created periods of shortage in the market where the price has been quite explosive. In the United States, we have started using belly or bacon for just about everything, adding it almost like a condiment to most things that we eat. And this has created very explosive responses in price, where the support bacon gives to the value of the whole cutout has been disproportional to what the belly actually is on the carcass. At the same time, hams have been supportive because our major trading partner, Mexico, almost exclusively imports hams from us now. And that's been supportive of the ham market. On the other hand, the loin and the ribs seem to have some issues with these changing taste profiles in the United States. If we can, what we need to watch in the future is how these develop. There's some argument about intermuscular fat, whether or not that needs to increase in percentage, or whether it's just a combination of pH and muscular fat. But indeed, the public is looking for a different taste right now than they have been over the past, and getting the supply chain organized to provide that taste is going to be a priority in the swine industry, particularly for producers.
Sterling, as we talk about the value to our pork products, obviously we know that domestic and foreign demand are crucial. How does the uncertainty of some of the trade agreement discussions that are going on, and whether they're modernization or any of this trade rhetoric, impact, how could it potentially impact the pork market if drastic measures are taken?
Well, this is a very interesting concern, and it is a concern to the animal protein markets, because we are counting on exports to be the main growth area in pork over the next 10 years. We do expect to see some domestic increase in demand, both on a per capita basis and also moving at least the rate of population growth. But that won't be dramatic. We expect that to maybe top out about 51 pounds per capita on a carcass basis, the way we calculate it. And that's similar to history. We've been somewhere between generally 49 and 51 pounds most of the time that we've looked at. So there will be some increase there, but we're really counting on being able to market another probably 400,000 to 500,000 tons of pork onto the open market, versus where we are today, about 2.5 million tons. So that's a fairly good increase, and we're expecting Mexico to be about 300,000 of that, with China and Hong Kong maybe making up another 100,000, and 100,000 finding a home somewhere else in the global market. So we are very dependent on Mexico and the growth in Mexican ham consumption to support this industry economically, so that it's positive economics for the United States producer.
We know some of our key trading partners now. Are there other international markets or other places on the global market that the U.S. is looking to increase exports to find support for the increased amount of pork that we're producing?
Well, there are potential for increased imports or U.S. exports into other South American countries that are developing their economies and able to consume more. That we need to understand the taste profiles in some of these countries and look at the opportunity to import more there. There are others that we can potentially compete with, European exports to increase total exports. But they're going to be small targets and growing different targets, primarily South America and some parts of Asia that we could look at for increasing exports over time, especially for pork. If you look at Southeast Asia and the development of those economies, particularly as we look at Thailand, Vietnam, parts of the Philippine Islands, they're all increasing their economies, and they do generally consume substantial amounts of pork. So that gives us an opportunity.
One of the things we haven't yet touched on today, Sterling, is the fact that while we are growing and increasing pork production, we're also increasing slaughter capacity in the U.S. How will that play a role in as we look at that fourth quarter crunch this year, but then as those other plants come online in the near future?
There has been what seems to be somewhat of a bottleneck in slaughter capacity over the last few quarters, where we seem to have more hogs available to slaughter than we were actually processing, and that could have contributed some to the really explosive prices we saw earlier this year. Now we're starting to see these plants come online, hopefully fully operational by into the next quarter, and then more the next year in 2018 and 2019. That will open up a lot. Right now, we're estimating that will be about level with where we need the supply to be, but by 2022 to 2025, there's the likelihood, if we see this increase in exports, we may actually even need more slaughter capacity at that point. So it should help. It will help with the live price, certainly for producers, as these plants come online and there's demand for the pork, and then build that into the lower price of feed, which is developing out there with this bigger than expected corn harvest and also soybean harvest. Then that makes it profitable going into next year.
So even as we're seeing prices drop back a little bit right now, we're still seeing some support as we see input prices maybe drop back as well?
That really is where the balance is this lower price for feed. If there were something dramatic on the feed side, a major drought, that would probably temporarily deplete available stocks, or some other big user of corn or soybeans, then that could have an effect on, it would be risky. Probably the biggest risk right now, though, that we face in pork prices and volatility are international trade policy, because if something happens there that's dramatic, we would be subject to it, and more of our production is destined for international markets. So geopolitical issues become increasingly important to manage from the United States perspective.
Sterling, just to recap, anything else that we need to, any other points that we need to take from the latest RaboResearch Food and Ag report?
The only thing I would point out additionally is just the increased risk, as I was talking about with international trade, but also increased risk on the feed side. Risk management is going to be a very critical component of swine management in the future. It already is, but there are new risks that are entering the market, and should be at least accounted for in strategic plans, how you would deal with these types of things, like a massive oversupply of pork on the U.S. market, for example, or the challenge with feed, but in particularly what would happen if there were big trade disruptions, and how would we deal with the oversupply of pork on the market from a risk perspective.
Are there ways for pork producers to proactively manage their risk? I know we talk about risk management heavily in row crop operations, and even some ways on some of the other sectors. What's available for pork producers to utilize risk management tools?
Well, independent pork producers that aren't part of an integrated chain have generally are still selling on contract, making sure those contracts are pretty stable and reflect what they can actually make a profit at. And we want to make sure that in those cases we're effectively hedging, and understand the liquidity that's involved with hedging. We got into that a little with PEDV, where we may have had the right risk management position on, but the margin calls were overwhelming the balance sheet of the producer, and so those are things that need to be taken into account as well. How to generate liquidity in those types of situations, and also how to make sure that you're locked in on the low side. So both using the corn market and what the volatility is there, and also the swine market, the volatility, assuming actually quite a bit of volatility on the pork market, and the potential for it on the feed side.
Sterling, anything else?
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
It was a great discussion, and we look forward to seeing what really, it seems like it's an exciting time for livestock producers in general, but some great opportunities for pork producers as well.
We're excited about the industry. We think that there's a lot of potential.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Megan. Have a good day.
I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.